Thank you, John. I too will focus on the Eurozone countries, although I think the idea that I'd like to present could perhaps be even extended to some of the MENA countries. When I hear the question, how do you finance growth in the Eurozone, particularly in the periphery, it reminds me of the metaphor of the absent-minded professor who's looking for his glasses, just to realize after a few minutes that he's wearing them. Sometimes the solution can be right in front of you, but yet hard to see. The EU, as was mentioned today, is one of the wealthiest regions in the world, and it sits on enormous, large pools of savings. The question is, why haven't these savings been channeled in the last few years, and how to do so in the future? There's three reasons why insufficient savings have actually gone into investment. The first one is, Athanasios mentioned monetary policy, and I think there's a recognition now that we're starting to hit the limits of the effectiveness of what you can do in unconventional monetary policy. The ECB has basically pulled out all the tricks it has in the hat. And what has it achieved? It has not achieved to reflate the European economy, but it has achieved at least to soften the blow, at least to jumpstart a little bit of a soft or slow recovery. There's been some rotation in financial markets between lower risk into higher risk assets, but very little has flowed into the real economy. We heard recently just now why, depending on the structure of the banking system, why that's so. But the fact of the matter is investment remains low despite extremely accommodative monetary policy. In normal circumstances, this would lead to the second approach, which would be fiscal policy would step in, would provide the stimulus. But I think we all understand why the political realities of the European Union today don't allow for that, which is why the third approach has been tried as well. The finance minister, Mr. Siktuna, just alluded to the Juncker plan, which is quasi-fiscal measures. You use the European Development Bank infrastructure, the EIB, also national development banks to channel investment. The problem there is, and again, other speakers have alluded to that, it still relies on a core underlying demand for credit that has to be there and for projects to be there, and that's simply partially lacking. So I'd like to float a simple idea today, which is to look into how to unlock some of the large savings pools that exist in Europe and redirect them into growth-enhancing investment. There are large EU pension funds, particularly in France, in Spain, in Italy, that are required by law, by regulation, to buy government bonds. It may seem crazy, but today they are buying bonds. These are long-term pension funds, and they are buying bonds that yield 0% return, in some cases actually negative. But they are forced to do so. They hold, we estimate on average, these funds hold between 40%, 45% of their portfolios on average consist of government bonds that are basically not doing what they need to do. This is punitive on the mission of the pension funds. It's potentially destabilizing for the financial sector in the long term. But the irony is that this bond portfolio is extremely valuable. It has risen in value over the last few years. As yields have come down, bond prices have moved up. So they're sitting on an unrealized capital gain. So the suggestion is simple. We should reform regulations that were designed for a normal interest rate environment and adapt them to the new era, which will be extremely low interest rates for a long, long period. This would require a careful recalibration of the rules, basically in a variety of different steps. But basically, you'd free up funds to flow into areas where they need to go. Number one, you'd sell the bonds, or you would allow pension funds to sell a segment of that bond portfolio. They would capture that capital gains, which is good for their balance sheets. They then could redirect these funds to higher yielding assets. But the second step would require to set rules what those assets could be. And again, if they were previously exposed to government credit risk, or ultimately GDP risk, you'd have to find assets, preferably infrastructure, that's publicly backed, government supported, so that the type of exposure is very similar. And this could even be done, primarily it should be done in Eurozone countries itself, which need the stimulus, but this could even be extended to some of the MENA countries that we talked about with the help of supranational agencies and government guarantees. Financially, the only thing that's required from a technical component point of view in terms of the portfolio management is that the return on the infrastructure investment is as good or better than the equivalent return on the government bond portfolio, which in today's world means basically zero or a little bit above zero. I think it's reasonable to say that most infrastructure projects would do that. So this simple proposal could potentially achieve a variety of benefits. One is it would boost economic growth. It would be tangible money flowing into the real economy. The second benefit is it's not fiscal. There's no political trouble here. You do not need consensus in the EU institutions, which would be hard to come by. The third is you could use existing EU vehicles and infrastructure, the EIB as one, but there's plenty of others that could be providing guarantees. And therefore, you're supportive of integration. It would be a success story for the EU as such. And we're in desperate need of success stories today. And finally, you would really help the fiduciary mission of these pension funds, which should be saving for the long term and are now struggling to do so and service their mission. I'll leave some of the more technical details for the Q&A, but in sum, I just wanted to say the EU is lucky. It sits on a pile of wealth, a large pool of savings that is looking for a home and currently doesn't have it. If you redirect some of that into growth-supporting assets, you boost not only the real economy, but you also help the financial sector in the long term. Thank you.